Say hello to everybody and especially to Pascal. It's been a long time. We haven't really chatted for quite some time, so look forward to it. I know in the last one you taught me about Polyglot. I spent quite a bit of time researching it and trying to understand what you are trying to do and your vision. But it's great. I like that ability to have the different data models across different platforms, storage mechanisms. So thank you for enlightening me on the last one, and I look forward to a similar one today. Thanks, Pascal. Over to you.
Thank you both, Debbie and Howard, for the introduction, for having me share some thoughts here, which will provoke, hopefully, reactions and discussions that will be enriching for everyone. So can you see my slides?
Yes, we
see
can.
My screen? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
So indeed, we met. Last presentation was in February of 2022, so 2.5 years ago. And things have moved, and our thinking has evolved. And but I'm still the founder and CEO of Accolade, and Accolade is a data modeling tool. Up and coming. If you speak to Gartner, they will confirm that. But today I'm vendor agnostic, and I'll talk about some observations we do with our customers about the market and about how to do things. So a quick plug for my friend Steve Hoberman, with whom I'm sure many of you know already. But Steve has been publishing this series of books called Align, Refine, and Design, which is a different take on the traditional steps of data modeling, which are conceptual, logical, and physical. And we've participated. I co-wrote the first book, and I'm writing the last two as well. So Howard, were you speaking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just, Veronica and I were talking about the remapping that Steve Hoberman had done, and I didn't know that you were critical and part of the story behind it with his Align, Refine, and Design series. But it was very interesting. He did present it to us some time back.
So I co-wrote the first book with MongoDB. I'm co-writing the book with Oracle on their latest version, and I'm doing the same on DynamoDB.
Nice.
But yeah, Steve was the initiator of all of this, and our tool is used for illustrations in all these books. So
okay.
So I'm going to talk about, the elephant in the room. Many people keep talking about how data modeling might be dead, and of course, the answer to that is that it is not, but it has and must evolve with our times, and so that will be part of the discussion. I've been speaking to Gartner a lot recently, as they saw in their statistics of their search terms on the Gartner portal, data modeling seems to be back in fashion. So many ways to interpret that. It can be because of ChatGPT or AI in general. It could be because people have felt the pain and are now realizing, having done postmortems, that it's time to do things right again. But this is backed by numbers of Gartner, so it's not anybody. So it's definitely a hot topic again. But my observation is that it needs to result into restoring a balance between two extremes that we have seen over the last decade or more, 15 years or so. And one is that there can be too much data modeling. And as a result, extremes deserve each other. There's been a pendulum swing to the other side where we have seen too little data modeling, and that's resulted in unproductive rework, errors, data quality issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm here to somehow promote restoring this balance. So everyone's seen one of those big enterprise data models, really large. We've got customers showing me models with 2,000, 3,000 tables, et cetera. And I keep asking the question, does anybody still understand them? And you see a blank stare in the eyes of people, even over Zoom or Teams. And it brings back an anecdote of when, in a previous life, I worked for a multi-billion-dollar company, and I wanted to change the basic data model of something really generic. It was an address, the concept of an address. And so I was on the business side of the business, and I said, look, we really need to change the structure of this object because it's not reflecting reality. So can we change it? They said, oh, no, you can't. We cannot change it. It's a canonical, it's defined in the canonical model of the enterprise. And I said, okay, yeah, well, let's just change the canonical model to reflect reality. Oh, no, we can't do that because we're doing an enterprise model. And I said, okay, so can it be done next month? Oh, no, that's going to take probably until the end of next year before we're done with that exercise. And so you can't change it. And I've looked at these cartoons that I think are great illustrations, of the dangers of doing things that sound great, but really get in the way of getting things done. And so, doing too much, so requirements are great, doing too much of it can be a problem. Data modeling is great, doing too much of it or making data modeling an end in itself instead of something that is at the service of delivering value is really what matters. Yes, Howard, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I should draw this conclusion. Are you, in a way, suggesting that the enterprise models are too complicated and too big to do correctly, or is there a new approach or a different way of dealing with it?
Oh, both. And I'll get over that. Yeah, I
Okay.
have slides for this. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So another thing is the dangers of abstraction, where if you do things too abstract, it can become counterproductive at some point. So use common sense is really the answer to everything. Knowing that common sense is not always so common, but that's the reality. The problem if you don't deliver value, or if you don't demonstrate that data modeling specifically delivers value, or for IT department that they deliver software that delivers value to the business, is that you create opportunities for people justifying to do shadow IT, for example, or bypassing the hurdle. And that's when it becomes really counterproductive. So one of the things that I've observed is, so I just spoke about one extreme, then there's the other extreme. And the other extreme, I'm blaming it on people misinterpreting the Agile Manifesto. And here I just want to be clear. I'm a huge fan of the Agile Manifesto, and our software is we release a new version every single Friday, and we think we adhere to the real principles of Agile Manifesto. But the problem is There's a lot of misinterpretation of this, probably because there hasn't been much true training about it. There's another issue, which is that some people with a lot of power have said things that, if taken out of context, can be dangerous. You know, the phrase by Mark Zuckerberg, "move fast and break things." I understand his intent, but that's not necessarily something you want to apply everywhere in IT life on a daily basis, because there can be perverse effects. And of course, you know, there's a lot of people who will take the simple but wrong options instead of doing things that are complex but right. And so there's been this debate going on between code first and design first. That's, I talked to many data modeling departments at Fortune 500 companies who tell me, look, you know, nowadays it's all for the Agile developer, and they don't want to hear about data modeling, and they just want to code first. And we, you know, we're trying to get governance under control, but it's a losing battle. And so, you know, these are some of the extremes. And to make things more complex even, there are people dangling magic wands saying, hey, but you know, you don't need to do data modeling, just take the industry model and everything will be working fine. And that's not going to work either, because, you know, if you do things without talking to the subject matter experts who know your business, it's not the industry model that's going to save your problem. It's going to give you a bloated answer that is generic to something that instead should be really specific to your business. Another, you know, dangerous talk from influential people, you know, the CEO of NVIDIA recently said, you don't need to teach programming to kids. You know, Gen AI is going to replace all of that. Yeah. Taken out of context, these things can be dangerous. And you know what? There are no magic wands around. It's everything is hard work in our trade. You know, it's you have to work hard to get things done. So the pendulum goes back and forth. People say, well, Agile didn't work nowadays. Recently, a lot of people have said it's the end of Agile. And the cause is Agile development. And I'm not saying that either. I'm a big fan of Agile, but let's do Agile correctly. And I have this other cartoon of people who want to take the advantage of Agile, but don't want to do Agile really. And so they say, well, you know, with a fixed deadline, fixed scope, and fixed quality, you can be Agile inside that triangle. You know, none of that helps, okay? Frameworks like SAFe, I'm personally, you know, I'm opinionated, but I don't see that as being Agile. There were no mentions of Scrum or backlog or retrospective or any of these words in the Agile Manifesto. Here's the Agile Manifesto, and it says, while there's value on the items on the right side of the column here, we value the items on the left side more. That doesn't mean we don't value the items on the right at all. It just means that the left side is more important than the right side, but that doesn't mean the right side is unimportant. And in particular, if you read the history of the Agile Manifesto, which is also on their website, they say, we want to restore a balance. We embrace modeling, we embrace documentation, we plan, but we don't make that the end goal. The end goal is to deliver value to the business. So I think that there's been a big misinterpretation between too much data modeling, not enough data modeling, too much agile without understanding it, not enough agile. All of that has contributed to the situation where we are right now, where some people talk about data modeling being dead, but it really isn't dead because it's necessary. It's what enables the delivery of quality software and quality data. Okay, so we want to restore this balance. How do we do that? We've taken inspiration from something in software development called domain-driven design. So we didn't invent anything, right? Domain-driven design, written back in 2003, I think, by Eric Evans, or at least published then, forward by Martin Fowler, who's one of the leading authors of the Agile Manifesto. This blue book is a bit hard to read, if you ask me. The red book explains how to do it. And it's the combination of the two is fantastic. What's the premise? The premise is that in large and complex applications, the intent originally was fantastic. Things grew and grew. The software got in the hands of different people. It went into its own life cycle. People moved on. New people came on board. New features were requested, etc., etc. It evolves, create. But at one point, it got so complex that nobody dares to touch it anymore. In fear that if you change something, you don't understand the impacts and it's going to break things and everything's going to break down in the end. So that's the pattern that has been the premise for domain-driven design and for software engineering. And people said, okay, well, there's some principles that will help do this in a better way, domain-driven design way. And it's sitting on a few principles: ubiquitous language, bounded context, focus, and modeling. It's not data modeling specifically, it's modeling in general. It could be modeling of processes, of logic, etc., but it's modeling in general. And so remember, Martin Fowler wrote the Agile Manifesto, said we are all in favor of modeling, but it shouldn't get in the way of getting things done. So here we are. We said, this is great inspiration. How do we apply these principles that are prevalent and popular among software developers and apply these principles to data modeling? And yes, Howard, we think that large and complex data models can be counterproductive, and they risk looking like what Eric Evans labeled a big ball of mud for software, and that there is a risk of having the same thing with data models. So what do? We are promoting 6 principles of domain-driven design, domain-driven data modeling. Okay, so the first one is using a ubiquitous language. We have learned in the traditional data modeling phases to do conceptual, logical, and physical. In the conceptual model, we're there to identify entities and their attributes, relationships and their cardinalities. But that's even actually going too fast. The first thing, and this matches Steve Hoberman's talk about the phase align, in align, refine, design. So in align, we want to make sure that we agree on terms. A data model is a communication tool. It's easy to break down, for communication to break down on not agreeing on terms. when you have different persona, you have business users, you have data modelers in the middle, you've got developers. People come from different backgrounds and they use different terms to define the same thing, or they use the same term to define different things. So the goal of the first phase is to agree on terms. And typically, because business is paying the bills really for IT to do the development, and the subject matter experts are experts at the core of the business. It's really the business terms should be what's used. Now, I know that it may frustrate some data modelers who want to use higher level concepts, or developers who are maybe more solution oriented and want to use the terms of the solution, the technology that's being used. But it helps to use the terms of the business. The second thing is to agree on the scope. It's too easy when you start a project to want to solve every problem. I call this here boiling the ocean. I fight every day with my own team whenever a customer suggests a new feature, that they want to take the opportunity to refactor this and redesign that. And I have to say, time out. Why don't we focus first on the problem of the customer? And then there are other things that we can do around that, but let's break down the problem of the customer into the smaller pieces, particularly if it's a really complex issue. Let's first fix the nominal case, and then we'll expand and do the marginal cases. But it's a constant fight against scope creep. And that's the second main principle of domain-driven data modeling. The third principle has to do with what I call the non-invented here syndrome. Engineers are engineers and they want to solve everything, and even things that don't need to be solved or that have already been solved by other people. And so with domain-driven data modeling, the idea is to focus on what really matters and, how should I say, delegate or let other parts be handled maybe in a different phase, maybe that by some other things that already work, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So that's the idea of focusing on the core domain. And then we can come to a shared understanding. Again, a data model is a communication tool. And what matters is that we fix or that we satisfy the needs of the business, of the people who are asking for the project. And who better to talk to than subject matter experts? Yes, Howard, you raised your hand.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, Pascal. I hope you don't mind.
No, please go ahead.
I was very interested in your previous slide, the last two slides, and it starts off with breaking the complex into smaller bounded contexts, which we understand are aligned to the domains. And then I see you breaking it down into subdomains and areas like that. Now, isn't the domain, and I'm assuming that you have to almost have a model of these domains which relate to the business concepts in a way. So a domain is not a generic or an abstract thing. It should have an anchor in the sort of concepts or the hierarchy of concepts within a domain.
So that very good question. And actually, the first question is, what do we mean with domain? Because it's an overused term, particularly in our trade. and people have a different interpretation of what domain means. And this problem was addressed in the book on domain-driven design by saying that domain in this context is only the problem at hand. So that may be in contradiction with what you think a domain is, or what I would think what a domain is, etc. But if you, you have to use some words, and they have their definition that is local to the context. And in this context, it's just the problem that is being addressed by the project. So
if I was to ask you, you spoke about your challenge as a business user to change the address. So you had that problem. What would the domains and subdomains be of that problem? Can you give me some examples?
Well, in that particular case, I worked for a postal operator where the concept of an address for the delivery of letters and parcels is core to the business. And the difficulty was having the IT department understand that the concept of an address for a postal operator is absolutely core and is not something you delegate. So in this particular case, the domain was OCR recognition of addresses written on letters, and so the domain was OCR address recognition. It was not. It was not the commercial aspects of selling stamps or the post office. You see, it was the domain was OCR address recognition.
Okay. And if you were to break that down into subdomains, what would that look like?
Yeah. So subdomains were. We used artificial intelligence 20 years ago with neural networks to parse addresses into blocks, and so recipient name was a completely different subdomain than zip code, for example.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Does that, so the point here is that domain has its own definition for this context, and it only reemphasizes the fact that language is so important before even talking about conceptual modeling, which is a term that could be frightening to some business users, right? And so ubiquitous language, hugely important. Breaking down complex problems into smaller ones and focusing on what matters are really critical pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And so with the shared understanding, I just want to reemphasize the involvement of subject matter experts, because it's, and I reuse this picture of Frank Lloyd Wright's house in near Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, and how blueprints, which really data models or blueprints for application, they're being used to convey a picture, to have a communication, so by the architect, both with the promoters of the project who are paying the bills, did I correctly translate into this blueprint what you, the owner, was envisioning? That's one part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is with the building contractor and the masons and all the people involved in the construction. to make sure that whatever was designed is buildable in the way that it was foreseen. So it's a communication tool. But if you don't talk to the subject matter expert, the person who's sponsoring the construction, the risk is you're going to have what's in this cartoon that is probably as old as the internet, about the difference of interpretation by different persona in a project about what it is that is being built. Yes, Remco, you have a question.
Yeah, my question. I like your way of looking, right. It is communication. It's also shared understanding. But it's also a hard thing. I know that for instance, the architecture, the building you have over there is not only the blueprint, but for communication towards the customer or the person wanting to have the house, you also build a more small scale model to give more insight. Is this how you want to say, hey, if I'm in data model, I'm not only listening to the business terms, right? I don't not only want to be aligned and refine my stuff, but also I'm going to communicate a lot on different levels back to my business people to make sure that they understand what they're telling me. Or am I too early?
Yeah. Oh, no, that's perfectly right. And it's also a communication tool with the people who build the building to make sure that whatever the vision was and is drawn on paper is buildable and makes sense. I'll translate this, talk to the software architect, the developer, the DBA, etc., to build consensus. Because and I'll again be opinionated against code first. As an entrepreneur who pays the bills of developers, I can tell you that building it correctly from the get-go is much cheaper than having the developer build it first, code first, and then you say, but that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. And you say, oh, yeah, well, let me tweak it to make it right. And I say, shouldn't you just throw it away and do it right from the start? This is what I mean with reaching a shared understanding in a design first approach. Now, that doesn't mean, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, that you shouldn't iterate and evolve. So the data model should be done where you don't build everything until you know everything, is that you build enough to build in the data model so you can deliver something of value to customer, but you need to build it in a way that it can rapidly evolve, because you know that you haven't built everything from the get-go. Okay, so finding the right balance between having built the consensus with all the stakeholders of the application on where we're going and what we're going to build in each phase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It really is communication two ways, right? Towards your business people needing to, towards the tech people building, and the interaction between the two. Every small iteration, what's the effect on the technical part? What's the effect on the business part? Yeah.
So one last principle is to cluster together what belongs together. This is easy with NoSQL databases. With relational databases, it may involve a subtyping and inheritance and things like that. I'm not going to go too much into this. It helps, when you do JSON stuff, and the book we're writing currently with Oracle, when it comes out in the next few weeks, will clearly explain what we mean with that, where even Oracle has seen the value of providing developers with a JSON interface to relational databases. So More on that pretty soon when the book comes out. So the idea with domain-driven data modeling is to reconcile business and IT through a shared understanding of the context and meaning of data. The problem, if we do too much data modeling, that causes developers to not do any data modeling anymore, is that everybody loses. What we're trying to do here is restore a balance so we can build this shared understanding, because the worst thing that can happen is for the business to have one interpretation of what the column means and the developers to have built a completely different logic into this data. The result of such misunderstanding is bad business decisions. And we don't want that. So by making sure that we have the right amount of data modeling, that we put the cursor in the right place, we can hope to restore this shared understanding. And so if we take an analogy, and I know we need to be careful with analogies, but if you build a rocket, not everyone knows everything there is to know about every little piece of highly complex machinery that needs to take place. You break it down into smaller problems, and then you give it to the expert in each one of the pieces. Where in data modeling, you may have to do that for really complex applications. And the way to do this is through two things. You've heard me talk about polyglot data modeling, which is data modeling for polyglot persistence. So if you have applications that use different technologies within them, a relational database for master data, a document database for some things, a graph database for others, etc., and REST APIs, you're going to need to understand the language of each of these different technologies. And that's what we think data modeling should be achieving, not just data modeling for relational, but for everything else. You need to be able to evolve your way of thinking. I talked about how conceptual modeling, well, there was probably a phase before that comes and makes sure that you're focusing on the right things and use the common terminology for all of that. And then we also do what's called metadata as code, because at scale, you need to be able to handle the fact that schemas evolve on a very rapid basis in many different places. And so, organizations are going to organize themselves, or the different departments in an organization. Everybody's going to buy a tool that's going to solve their own problem. And then once you have that, you have multiplied the number of silos, and developers are going to store stuff in Git. And then people who use Databricks, Unity Catalog will store stuff there. And then Kafka people will have schema registries, and API people will have Swagger Hub, et cetera, you end up with metadata silos, and there's a need to synchronize across all of this stuff. So you may need lineage between models, that depend on each other because you use smaller models, in this concept of domain-driven data modeling. You have smaller modular reusable models, and so you need a lineage to understand how it's all working together. So there's new challenges, of course, in doing things differently. But this, with the application of all these principles, you should be able to better answer the requirements of complex organizations' complex application in today's world. So that's my talk for today, and we have 11 minutes to respond to questions.
Thank you, Pascal. Maybe if I can.
Can I start off, Howard?
Yes.
Can you go 2 slides back with your overview with all your pictograms? Yeah. No, the other one there. No, the last one. Yeah, this one. In particular, I like your idea about saying, hey, let's break everything up in smaller parts and model those parts. It's almost like the mesh principle, right? See data as a product, almost, right? Not the same, but see small portions. At the same token, everything is still related to each other. How do you make sure that, because your analogy with the rocket, right? Oh, it's very complex. Let's break it down in smaller parts where we have specific subject domain matter experts creating that small part of the very complex stuff. How do you make sure that everything is still related to each other from a business perspective and a technical perspective? Although I think the business perspective is harder than the technical one.
So, you know, a lineage picture may help. In the end, the software needs to work. So you cannot overlook an object that is necessary. You cannot overlook a conform dimension that needs to appear in your data lake. You know, you need to. You need to be organized. I'm not saying it's not because you break things down that you shouldn't be rigorous, right?
Yeah, I agree. But the thing is that again, from a technical perspective, I think when you have a whole bunch of models, I think what you showed, right, the alignment between all the different kind of models, graphs or whatever, or in the GitHub and the whatever you're going to do. I get it, the technical one, right? All the schemas. I get that you say, hey, we can connect them to each other, but also I think that's a scary part when you break stuff down. How do we make sure that the business really says we are on the same grain? We know what we're talking about from our perspective, because you're talking about clients and we are talking about customers. How do we make sure that these are the same or they are not the same?
So I could simply say, well, having one monolithic model does not answer the question either. You know, you still need to make sure that you're answering the global problem in the end, right? Whether it's with one big one or several small ones, you still need to realize the project.
Is that your way of thinking helping? Well, I see data governance over here. I think that's more or less the right spot where you want to have the information all right on the same level, yes or no. Does it support? It's all going towards one business glossary or data governance or whatever.
It really depends on the organizations. We've got customers that are conglomerates of very different businesses. I would never suggest to have one single glossary for all of them. There is the concept of domain, glossaries per domain, or actually, I think that it shouldn't be one-to-one. You should tag some terms, to indicate that they belong to this and that domain, and it should be an end-to-end relationship, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I don't disagree with you, Pascal. Anyway, I'm just curious on your point of view, because if you have a conglomerate, you could ask, do you want to have an enterprise-wide model anyway, right? Because you're probably never going to reach that part. So
Right.
It doesn't even make sense to have one enterprise-wide business glossary. Let's be honest, master data management is bound to fail in those situations.
So the other day we bumped into the fact that SAP has, I don't remember, between 92,000 and 98,000 tables, right? But who wants to model it all? It doesn't make any sense because it's supposed to serve many different types of businesses that don't have anything to do with each other. So how granular is your domain and subdomain? The question that Howard asked earlier is really critical to this. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's no generic answer. I go back to common sense. I'm just challenging a little bit, the ways of the past and saying, think about it. Break it down if it makes sense. Don't if it doesn't make sense. Huh? But there is a way to do things in a modular manner that doesn't require a monolithic approach, and that has a lot of advantages. It doesn't solve every problem. There's no magic wand, but it helps in many cases by breaking things down.
Yep. Thanks.
So let me ask. I have a few questions, but I'd love to check with the audience in terms of, does anybody else have a question? Henny, I'm sure you have a question or two.
Yes, lots of questions. Even, I mean, I've been in the industry for a couple of years, but I think what I'm seeing more and more these days at my existing clients as well, there's no real appetite, at least where I'm sitting, from business to go on an extensive data modeling journey. In fact, they don't even standardize on the data modeling tools. And then it becomes difficult to have, for me, some data modeling is better than no data modeling, but the approach just becomes a theoretical exercise, right? And it becomes a really difficult sell to business. So for me, the challenge is still to make sure whatever approach we agree on is really, really pragmatic, and that obviously you need to involve business. I'm seeing that also in my space where it almost becomes a design or architecture discussion with no involvement of business. And I think that's where it's also falling flat.
So I think that if data modeling is sold as an end goal, there's no chance anymore of getting any traction, indeed. But if data modeling helps achieve the delivery of software, then it works. The goal of data modeling is not to create a data model. It's actually to create a schema, be it a DDL in relational or an Avro schema for Kafka or for whatever technology, an API. That's where you deliver value, is by saying the data model is not the end goal. The artifact that is the result of the data model is what works. And we've got, I'll name one of our customers, Nike, who uses a polyglot model that derives a Databricks model, an Open API model, a Hive model, a SQL Server model, a Kafka Avro model. All of those schemas are now in sync. And if you change one, you add one column upstream in the chain, all of the schemas are maintained in sync, then it works. That's the added value. The data model is not the added value. The schema artifacts are the added value.
No, I fully agree with that approach. And if I can just tie it back, and I think therein lies part of the challenge is if we think of the latest release of the Fabric capability and how you can expose any data assets in one lake to end users. I think the approach is almost, well, I've got access to my data, so why do we want to go through an extensive process to model the the data assets. I can see the value, but again, business already have access to all the relevant data assets. So they're going on an exploratory drive instead of waiting for a design. So yeah, I understand the data model is not an end goal, but for me, it's difficult to position it in front of business these days.
Also, there's a challenge. I know it, but the data dictionaries, the Alation and Calibra and all these tools, they're great at harvesting data and profiling data, but that's when the damage is already done, where a column name may not represent what the business understands the logic to be to accumulate the data. Data modeling will help do the design. And as much as people now say, oh, code first and don't design, the problem is the total cost of ownership when you realize that there's been damage. The worst being even that you don't realize that there's damage. So I think that the value proposition is by saying you're going to reduce your total cost of ownership because people will have that shared understanding of the meaning and context of the data.
Makes sense. Thanks, Pascal. Thanks, Edward.
But I know it's a hard sell. People don't want to hear it. It's too much work. They'd rather have a magic wand, but there's no such thing.
It's like no requirements for Agile. That's that balance that we need to get right that you referred to earlier.
Yep.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Henny. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Are there any other questions? Kasim or Kasim?
So I'd just like to ask, to what extent do you think AI and ML techniques will help aid with fast-tracking data modeling?
I get that question a lot. So I think that it's not a magic wand, but used smartly, it can help be more productive. If your prompt engineering requires to type so much so that ChatGPT will understand what it needs to do, you may be just as well typing it directly into your model. But there are things, there's features that are in our backlog, but they're not super high, to just help with productivity using ChatGPT. At this stage, I think that you still need the wisdom of subject matter experts and to translate that into something. ChatGPT doesn't know your business like your subject matter experts know it. Or the effort to extract the information out of ChatGPT is so much work that I think you still need the data modeling tool at this point. My personal opinion. And it's not wishful thinking.
I think September 9, right, Howard?
Yes, I was about to share. I just wanted to check with Rizwana. Are you comfortable with the answer?
Absolutely, thanks.
Okay, and that's certainly. I don't know if you've seen Remco's post, Rizwana. He actually he's on a mission to see how far he can go with ChatGPT and generative AI to build the models and the challenges that he's facing. So I think he's pretty much in line with what Pascal has just spoken about. Am I in agreement there? Sort of.
Sort of.
Okay.
Go ahead, Remco. I'm interested.
Join me.
Okay.
I think, Debbie, was September 9, right? We discussed.
That is correct. Yeah. September the 9th, Pascal will be presenting.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Great. Anybody else? And maybe if I could ask a question then, Pascal. I had one question about moving, instead of data modeling, is moving towards an ontology, which is more machine readable. Now, again, that doesn't deal with the polyglot storage mechanisms, but is that not part of the solution? And an ontology can have micro vocabularies and breaking it down into those different areas, but it then also allows you to associate different concepts.
Yeah, so actually in our tool, that's the one piece that is missing currently, but we're going to solve that fairly soon, is to support RDF triples and RDFS and OWL and shackle, because
Right.
I'm a huge believer in that. As a matter of fact, in our polyglot data modeling, we do present a graph view, which our users tell us, our business users tell us, is less intimidating than rectangle in ERDs. So I believe both in the artifact capabilities and the graphical representation. But it doesn't change the gist of the principles that I just talked about, that you still want to approach it from the principle of breaking things down and using the right vocabulary.
I suppose what I'm saying is that because ontology supports those micro vocabularies, you almost have a vocabulary around the problem or the bounded context that you.
If defined according to the business terms, yeah.
Yeah. And would that not, because the ontology is metadata, would that not facilitate quite a bit of the relationships across and the lineage across those different models?
In theory, yes. I haven't done it that way, but I think that that would be something that's doable. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Now, the last question I have was, you mentioned the SAP model, and it was quite interesting because Steve Hoberman actually was engaged by the SAP organization to enable the business people to understand what was in SAP. It was, and again, you're right, it's that powerful communication mechanism, but I believe that's something that he did was to build a subject area model / a conceptual model where people could understand how to, first of all, what was the depth and breadth of, well, more the breadth of SAP, but allow the executives to all have that common understanding. Now, that must have been almost similar to an enterprise data model. And he used that relationship modeling to bring that about. I mean, what's your feeling around that?
So I didn't know Steve had been involved in that. I'm aware of a tool called Sapphire that helps you extract out of the SAP data model exactly what you need. And then you can export that to a traditional data modeling tool. Is that what you're referring to, or
No,
different?
he was actually engaged, and I'll send him an email just for more details. Veronica may have more, but he was engaged by SAP to simplify and enable the business people to understand what was in this big monster application, and he used conceptual modeling and subject area models to be able to simplify it. Or it's almost abstraction for presentation, not abstraction as we know it, but abstraction for presentation, where you could ensure that the whole system was put together and with some level of overlaps.
Yeah, I'm not aware of his effort in that area. I'd be happy to talk to him next opportunity.
Okay. And then just, sorry, the last one that I had was, we hear a lot about data mesh and domain-driven development. I was certainly under the impression that each of those domains almost represented a high-level business concept, that those domains, the way in which they break the data mesh down, and I thought that was sort of also come from Martin Fowler in terms of domain-driven. Is that an incorrect assumption on my behalf, that it's not really at that level, but it's more at a business problem level?
I'm not a practitioner of data mesh, so it's hard for me to respond. Okay. Remco, do you have some insight there? Maybe not.
I think he may have dropped off.
He may have dropped off. Yeah.
Yes, but that would. Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah,
thank you.
There's some semantic differences about things, and we need to be careful not to be too hung up on definitions that we read about, and we need to use common sense.
Understand. Fantastic.
All right.
Pascal, thank you very much. And just anyone who's interested, those are the contact details for Pascal written in JSON. Pascal, why don't you just leave that up a bit more? I don't think anyone had time to see it. Thank you. Excellent.
Okay. Very good. Thank you everyone for your attention and for your attendance. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Howard and Debbie, for having me.
Thanks,
Speak
Pascal.
to you soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.